Good morning, everybody. It's your favorite aspiring revolutionary here, a wandering author, reminding you that we are all the authors of our own lives. As always, my message remains the same: spend less, live more, earn your freedom with frugality. And today we are going to return to the Summa Theologica by St. Thomas Aquinas and moving on to question number 6, which is on the goodness of God. So, Aquinas considers the nature of God's goodness by using 4 questions: whether goodness belongs to God, whether God is the supreme good, whether he alone is essentially good, whether all things are good by the divine goodness. So let's begin with the first article, whether God is good. So goodness can appear as if it is outside of God because it is definable by mode, species, and order. Yet God transcends these constructs. Additionally, everything has a desire for the good, but not all things seem to be pursuing God or to know him. On the contrary, it was written, "The Lord is good to them that hope in him, to the soul that seeketh him," in the book of Lamentations, chapter 3, verse 25. St. Thomas's response is that, above all things, goodness belongs to God, for a thing is good according to its desirableness. Everything wants to be the most perfect version of itself, and the effects of an agent must bear some sort of resemblance to the agent. When it comes to God, we can see the agent is desirable and has the nature of good. As the first effective cause of all things, he caused all goodness, and thus the aspect of good and desirableness belong to him. Mode, species, and order are a classification of caused things. But good is in God as in its cause, and hence it belongs to him to impose mode, species, and order on others. Since everything desires perfection, all things desire God himself, inasmuch as the perfections of all things are so many similitudes of the divine being. So all types of goodness are derived from God himself. Rational beings may know of God as he is, through the exercise of the intellect, while lower beings only know of him through participation in goodness, which is his goodness. Others yet have a natural desire without knowledge, as being directed to their ends by a higher intelligence. And that's like the reflexes, or, what do you call those things? Instincts that an animal is born with. Their instincts drive them to good, and that goodness is of God, so all things desire God. Now, question or article number 2 of question number 6, whether God is the supreme good. So, as always with these things, we start off with several objections, and then we move on to St. Thomas's response. So God may not appear to be the supreme good, because one would assume the supreme good would add to a thing's goodness, and to the good itself. Yet that which adds to a thing is a compound, and since we have shown that God is supremely simple, he must not be the supreme good. Furthermore, Aristotle says in his book on ethics that good is what all desire, and since God is the end of all things, there must be no good other than him. And in Luke 18:19, it says, "None is good but God alone." Supreme is used to compare, and as we may not compare anything to God, shouldn't he be something other than the supreme good? Since things of a different genus may not be compared, such as how you cannot compare sourness to a triangle, God must not be the supreme good. Yet, Augustine of Hippo says, the Trinity of the divine persons is the supreme good, discerned by purified minds. In St. Thomas's view, God is the supreme good, even though he exists outside the genus of other things. For good is attributed to God inasmuch as all desired perfections flow from him as the first cause. Yet these goods flow from him as non-univocal agents, but as from an agent which does not agree with its effects, either in species or genus. So God transcends all things. Heat emanates from the sun as an equivocal cause, so the sun's heat is more excellent than the heat it causes. In the same way, God is the equivocal cause of the goodness in all things. So the goodness of God in this analogy is like the heat produced by the sun. Obviously the sun's heat is more excellent or more powerful than the heat that we feel here on Earth. If we were to go up to the sun, it would be quite hot. The goodness in God is the sun's heat. And as such, the good must exist in him in the most excellent way. The supreme good, as such, only adds to a thing in relation to others. When it comes to God and creation, creation may be made to resemble God more, but not the converse. So creations cannot be made, or God cannot be made to resemble creations more, though creations can be made to resemble him more. As what is knowable is so called with relation to knowledge, not that it depends on knowledge, but because knowledge depends on it. Not all types of good are desired by everyone either, only that whatever one desires has the nature of good. Finally, things in a different genus may not be compared, like tastes and shapes. We can't compare how sweet something is to the shape of something. At least only if we could only do that by way of analogy. However, God is outside the concept of genus. He transcends it and is the principle of every genus. And question 6, article number 3. Whether to be essentially good belongs to God alone. This is asking whether goodness as his essence is only something that God can have. And here are several objections. Being one has been said to be convertible with being itself, and the good in the metaphysics of Aristotle. So it may appear that every being is essentially good. Furthermore, since all things desire to be, and to be is equivalent to the good, it may seem that every being is good. All things are good by their own goodness, so to speak. Therefore, if there is anything which is not good, essentially, it is necessary to say that its goodness is not its own essence. A thing's goodness, since it exists, must be good, and if it is not, it must be by some other goodness. And the same must apply to that good, and we can proceed on to infinity, to some goodness which is not good by any other goodness. So, on the contrary, Boethius says that all things but God are good by participation, so they must not be essential goods. Only God is an essential good, because things are only called good according to their perfection, which is in God. The perfection of something occurs in 3 parts. According to the constitution of its own being, according to its accidental qualities, or in the attainment of another thing as the end. If we look again at a fire as our example, its first perfection is its existence. This is obtained through its substantial form. The second perfection is through the flame's accidental qualities, which are its traits or attributes, such as heat and dryness. And then the third perfection is its ability to come and rest in its place. Aquinas says this triple perfection belongs to no creature by its own essence. It belongs to God only, in whom alone essence is existence, in whom there are no accidents. Anything that has an accidental quality receives it from the essential quality of God, and God is not aimed at an end, but is himself the last end of all things. Hence it is manifest that God alone has every kind of perfection by his own essence. Therefore, he himself alone is good essentially. Oneness only implies non-division and has no bearing on goodness, especially in composite beings. All beings are good, yet a creature's essence is not just being. So it does not follow that they are essential goods. A creature's goodness is not its essence, but rather what is added to it. The added goodness is good, but is something separate from its essence or end. And finally, we turn to article number 4, whether all things are good by the divine goodness. So, as some objections to this one, Augustine said, "This and that are good, take away this and that, and see good itself if thou canst. And so thou shalt see God, and good not by any other good, but the good of every good." So it may seem that all things are good by God. Boethius also adds that things are called good because they are directed to God by reason of the divine goodness. However, all things are good inasmuch as they have being. but they are not called beings through the divine being, but through their own being. Thus, things are good by their own goodness, not that of the divine. So we are able to be good on our own, not just through God. Relative things are given extrinsic denomination, like how something is placed in a place or measured by a measurement. When it comes to absolutes, there are different ideas. Plato believed in a separation of ideas and forms, such as Socrates being a man according to the separate idea of man or of humanity. Plato's philosophy held that there were an absolute man and an absolute horse, for example, and in like manner he held there were separate ideas for absolute being and absolute oneness. All things participate in this absolute being and absolute oneness, and the absolutes were the supreme good. And because good is convertible with being, as one is also, he called God the absolute good. God is essentially being and essentially good. And Aristotle's thinking agrees with this. As much as we participate in being a goodness through God, as shown from the prior arguments, everything is called good from the divine goodness. And so of all things there is one goodness, and yet many goodnesses. And that concludes our discussion on the goodness of God. As always, my question to you guys remains the same. What are y'all doing in order to inspire, uplift, and empower your local community today? Because this world isn't changing unless we all do our part, and you can count on me to do mine daily. Until next time, God bless.